Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone for this session, which I'm personally looking forward to. I've spoken with a number of the colleagues on the panel before and always had a really interesting debate, so I'm sure that today will be no different. Our topic is going to be finance and responsible AI, exploring the opportunities, but I'm sure we'll look a little bit outside of just the finance arena as well. So just to give you a sense of how we're going to run the session, and then I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves to you. Following that introduction, Marta has kindly agreed to set the scene and talk for sort of 5 to 10 minutes and give us an overview of her perspective. We'll then move into a Q&A with the panel members for about 20 minutes, after which we'd love to get your questions. So please do put them in Slido, vote them up, and then we'll be taking questions both from the room and also from online. So let me start by asking the panel to introduce themselves to you. Henrike, would you like to go first?
So my name is Henrike Müller, delighted to be here. I work for the Financial Conduct Authority, one of the financial services regulators here in the UK, and I lead the team working on AI.
Lukasz?
I'm Lukasz Spruch. I'm a professor of mathematics at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm a program director for the Finance and Economics program at Alan Turing Institute, and I also lead the project fair around responsible AI in financial services industry.
Marta?
Good morning. I'm Marta Kwiatkowska. I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Oxford, and I'm also a co-investigator on the FAIR project at the Alan Turing Institute. I have been working on automated verification throughout most of my career, but in the past few years I started adapting the techniques to verify robustness of AI systems.
Okay. Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here. My name is Paul Donga. I'm Group Head of Data and AI Ethics at Lloyds Banking Group.
And Charmaine?
Hi, everybody. I'm Charmaine, and I work in HSBC, and I head up Group BI and Analytics, and I'm also the Group Head of ESG Data and Analytics.
Fantastic, thank you. So Marta, would you like to kick us off, please?
We are here because of artificial intelligence. I think most people these days refer to it as AI or AIs, sort of humanizing it a little bit. I wanted to say, to set the scene. Now, artificial intelligence is relevant for us because it is really driving automation in education, in industry, in businesses, in services, everywhere. And of course, you know, if you look at the history of industry, we have a lot of experience of deploying automation safely. Take aviation, for example. You know, if you take a flight, you are most of the time on autopilot, even while the pilot is asleep. It is one of the most heavily regulated industries, both aircraft engineering as well as, you know, flight safety. But it was not always like this. In the 1920s, when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic for the first time, he was greeted by 500 people when he was leaving. By the time he arrived in Paris, 33 hours later, 100,000 people turned up to greet him and actually went, you know, to see the aircraft. Of course, a little bit like the foundation models session yesterday, I hear. Okay. So what happened to the aviation industry is, you know, following that flight, there was a boom. You know, innovation, you know, is often, successful innovation is often followed by a boom. And right now, there is very similar excitement about AI and, you know, the potential of AI. But I dare say we are witnessing very similar attitudes towards safety. I don't know whether you know about Lindbergh's flight, but he actually flew without a parachute and without a radio. And sometimes he had to go down about 10 meters above the ocean and had to stay awake because this was a solo flight. He had to stay awake for 33 hours. Why? Because he wanted to take more fuel. Okay, right, so we are now talking about responsible automation. I think this is something that can be excused, I think, early on. And the reason I'm coming up with this historical example is because I see a lot of parallels and much similarity between that part of industrial history and what is now happening in AI. AI, especially driven by machine learning, deep learning, has made tremendous progress, really tremendous progress, but it's also caused tremendous excitement. And in this excitement, I think we are forgetting that what has driven this innovation is really optimizing performance. But there are trade-offs between optimal performance, optimizing performance in the sense of, can we get another paper? Can we beat humans? This is the story of AI up until now. But there is a lot less emphasis on maintenance, on safety, on explainability. These are black boxes which cannot be explained. Why have they made that decision? So I think this is a cautionary tale that we really need to step back and think about how to push this industry forward and make it a successful industry. Now, what happens with innovation, all innovations, and this applies also to AI, is that, you can take safety engineering, for example, from aviation and apply it in this case. But you can't, because new solutions cause new failure modes and introduce new risks. So I'll give you one example. I leave finance to better qualified people, so I'll give you one example. There are now a lot of driver assistance systems that are being introduced in cars and sort of conventional cars. Some of them have autopilot ability as well. Now, these driver assistance systems read signs using traffic signs using neural networks, but they can misread them. Mistakes are common. So what if a car misreads a speed limit sign and then suddenly starts driving at that speed? Okay, if you think I'm dramatizing, after dramatizing these talks, this is not the case because these things have actually happened. But this is a new risk, a new behavior that the designers had not thought of. So if that speed is not legal speed and the car is on autopilot, who is responsible? This is why we are all here. This is why we are all here, because it's about designing systems so that they are robust, reliable, safe, explainable. They do not have bias. And also, I think about engineering. So in cases like this, what we need is fail-safes as well, okay? So it's fine, but if it misreads, it needs to be a failure mode that the system has to handle. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. Thank you. So, if I can, excuse me, we'll now turn to the panel, and I'd like to sort of pick up on that first topic that Marta has raised about the need for robustness and the need to extend robustness across a wider range of different, let's say, characteristics in AI. So thinking about fairness, thinking about explainability and a range of other aspects. In the context of financial services, obviously there's a long tradition of model risk management. Banks, assisted by regulators, have really built this into their core of their compliance approaches. So I wonder, Charmaine, turning to you first, I wonder does that give the financial services industry a head start? How can we learn from, build on model risk management to help us in the broader case of AI? And what might be some of the lessons for other industries that they could benefit from?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've also missed out on the dress code. I should have gotten the memo. So I think in terms of the financial industry, I think there is a lot of lessons learned that we could apply for that, especially for model risk management. So as we all know here, the financial industry is one of the most highly regulated industries across there. Obviously, my colleague from FCA would definitely attest to that. And we are highly regulated for a number of reasons. But I'd just like to call out a couple of things. So the first thing is that banking is a business also about risk. And we know quite a lot about risk in terms of managing, monitoring risks, making sure that we can control and mitigate these risks. So in that aspect, in particularly model risk management, has been quite established in the banking industry in the past sort of 5 to 10 years. It's been quite well established. Every bank has a sort of model risk management area. And we make sure that these are written into the policies of the bank. And I think the last thing that I wanted to say is that actually none of us here would bank with a bank that we don't trust. Banking is about the business of trust, as we've all recently seen. We need to be transparent. We need to be accountable. We need to make sure that the decisions that we make are free from bias. And we need to make sure that our customers trust us. If we don't manage these risks, if we don't look at new technology and do this, the risk to the bank is immense. We will have reputational risks. We will have social impacts, financial impacts across the industry. So this is extremely important to us. And I think that we could leverage some of these learnings that we've done through our risk management practices across the model lifecycle towards how we look at new technology, or fairly new technology.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Paul, I'll come to you in just a second, but actually I'd like to jump to the sort of the regulator view first, please. MRM lessons, that we can learn from. How can we build on that to extend it to broader AI?
Ray, if that's okay with you, I'm just going to respond to Marta for 1 second.
Please.
I like the comparison with aviation, and I like the comparison saying these are heavily regulated industries. But I think what is novel with AI is it's about conduct, ultimately. It can influence the way humans and firms behave. And I think that's novel, both in terms of the technology itself, but also from a regulatory perspective. So, and I don't quite see that in aviation. If you see, we don't have autonomous planes, but just, wanted to put that out there. And Ray, to your question, so model risk management is obviously very important. I think we're seeing that now in financial markets. But what I really wanted to say is, I think AI is in large parts about data. It's a commonplace to say that to an audience such as this one. But it is important to recognize, and when I say data, I think there's something here also around data as an input, understanding where the data comes from, so provenance, quality, representativeness, and so on, as key inputs into the model themselves. And once you start thinking about that in a sort of structured way, I think what you then start to realize, it's not just a key input, but it does change thinking about data in an ethical way, changes the workflow processes in a firm as well. Because you need to have teams who can certify where the data comes from. You need to have teams who can come to a quality assessment of the integrity of the data and its representativeness and so on. So for me, there's something in the data space that I think is worthwhile exploring. And I think it's fascinating, and it comes back to the aviation point and everything to do with AI being novel, because the moment you start thinking about data, what you start seeing in firms as well, and I see that at the FCA, you see a change in the culture and the organization, the structure of the organization, just because more thought needs to be given to data, and that requires a change in the way an organization is structured and works.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, I know this is a topic you've been looking at a lot recently.
Yeah, indeed, Ray. So model risk management, certainly in the banks that I've worked in, and as Charmaine has attested, it is a very well-established discipline. And often the liquidity and the market risk and the financial risk models that those departments assure and provide oversight for is well understood. So the assumptions going into the financial models is well understood, the engineering is well understood. And there are qualified people that have been doing this for some time. So the challenge we have now, and indeed the opportunity, is to leverage that really good framework in model risk management that's mature and structured, and leverage it for managing ethical risks, both from a data and a model perspective. So I think the generally accepted norm is to go through an ethical impact assessment for every model within the bank. That seems to be an accepted norm. An ethical impact assessment would rate every model through a series of questions and determine a rating that says this model, from an ethical perspective, is high, medium, or low risk, or some similar tiering. And then embedded within model risk management would be a set of mitigating controls. Clearly, if the model is classed as high risk from an ethical perspective, the controls are that much more severe and that much more robust, and the thresholds that they have to pass is that much higher. So I think that approach is very beneficial, both for data and for AI, and that's increasingly being adopted. And maybe from the FCA perspective, I'd like to really understand forward thinking what that looks like. Some of the challenges with that is in terms of skill sets, right? So you've got model risk management that really looks at materiality of financial models, but now they're looking at these two concepts, amongst others, Ray, that you mentioned, so explainability and fairness. And these are thorny problems, right? So fairness, so for a credit lending model, which is the standard model that many banks have out there, how do you define what is fair? It's a contested concept, right? There are statistical measures, the equality of odds or disparate parity or whatever it is, but are they the right statistical measures for fairness for a bank to adopt? And that's actually quite a hard question to answer because they are based on robust techniques to make credit lending decisions. So we're working through understanding what actually fairness means. And there are some novel approaches to that around Pareto optimization, some of the mathematical techniques, which are quite interesting. And I think on the other one, Ray, explainability, again, really thorny problem, right? So Shapley values is one particular technique used for logistic regression. That's quite nice from a mathematical perspective, but that's not generalizable to all models, and it runs into computation constraints as well. So I think from a research perspective, there's a lot that we should draw on in model risk management to make explainability a lot better. And that ability to provide some transparency, whether that's procedural fairness or outcome-based fairness, is, I think, an ongoing effort and an endeavor within model risk management.
And I think that highlights, just to summarize the discussion in terms of what we said, I think data management practices in banks currently we could leverage on, because every bank right now, or most banks, definitely have a chief data officer. The second thing is enhanced risk management and model management and the thresholds and all of that that we could leverage on. The third thing is actually what you've alluded to, is the collaboration. No bank has it all. No industry has it all. And what we've learned in the past is if we didn't work together with academia, with regulators around the world, the scale and size of what we're looking at in terms of HSBC, if we didn't work with our other partners in terms of the industry, it wouldn't work. So these are really tough questions that you've raised, Paul, and we need to crack it sort of together in a collaborative effort in terms of all our experience, in terms of the research and stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. Putting in the right guardrails in the right way. It's all about that. How do we put in the right guardrails? And it's not just model risk management. There's other departments within the bank that play a role and a function in that as well.
Can I actually just build on that for a second? Because a question that that I'm often asked is, where should the accountabilities sit for these, for these topics, right? And one answer is clearly that it's an enterprise-wide concern, so everybody's got to be part of the solution. But again, what can we learn from banking? Very sophisticated, first line, second line, third line of defense, etc., which I think a lot of industries look at and try to learn from. Paul, what are your thoughts on accountabilities and MRM team versus others, etc.? How does that come together?
Yeah, I think on the accountability question, and again, a real thorny one. So the first line of defence, the second line of defence have their delineated levels of responsibility. And there's a very distinct differences between what oversight and independent assurance means. And if there are any model risk management folk in the audience, I'm sure you can attest to that. We could talk for hours just about those 2 or 3 phrases. So often what the teams will do is they will be very, very specific about their remit and about signing models off. Ultimately, however, group risk committees, which are part of every bank, will provide the ultimate sign-off on the work that's done. So there will be almost a senior manager regime that currently is adopted for financial models. Now, it's an open question whether the senior management regime should also sit for AI and data ethics. Maybe we've got some interesting discussions on that, but certainly at the group risk committee and executive level, ultimately it will roll up to that, and they should maintain accountability for ethics.
Great.
That's my view.
Thank you.
So if I
Yeah,
can
well.
add, it's important to also consider signing off on the processes
Absolutely.
and certification for processes. Okay, it's not just the head's responsibility.
Maybe the next question.
And that's a parallel from safety engineering.
Absolutely.
I think that's a very good observation, and it also helps to address, one of the concerns, which is scaling, because the most senior committee probably doesn't have the capacity to sign off on every model, maybe at the moment, but as AI models are going to proliferate, and then the processes become even more important because every model needs to go through the process, and if the process works, then you can be more confident that the ultimate outcome will be achieved.
Yeah, but the process has to do both validation, which is my model suited for the particular purpose, but also is my model correct, works according to the specification. There are guarantees that it will behave correctly in all settings, or perhaps in a limited set of.
Yeah.
Just to build on that one point, thank you, Martha, is what we call ethical edge cases. So these would typically be models or uses and deployment of data, which is perfectly legal. So from a GDPR perspective, we're compliant from a legal perspective, security perspective. We can tick all the boxes and say, yes, we are okay to deploy the model. But an edge case, from my perspective, certainly is, well, we know we can, but actually should we still deploy that model? And a real simple example of this is, should banks scrape social media data and combine it with their customer data to try and give maybe vulnerable people an opportunity for a bank loan that they otherwise wouldn't have? Is it ethical to use alternative data sources and augment our customer data with that to then drive decisions as good as those decisions might be from our perspective? Is that the right thing? And in my mind, that certainly becomes an edge case. And there isn't really, to my knowledge, a computer algorithm that will say that's fine. That becomes a human decision. So I think some of the banks are leaning towards, we need to have an ethics council or an ethics committee that really opines on edge cases where the technology is not going to tell you whether it's ethical. It's actually people sitting around a table and saying, does that model comply with our values as a bank? What do we stand for? And these are nascent and very difficult and qualitative problems to answer, and you can't rely on the algorithms to answer them for you. So I just wanted to add that one.
Thank you. Lukash, I'd like to turn to you next to begin on the next question, which is something that we at Accenture get asked a lot, and I know is of a concern to many companies, is how do you actually measure whether you're being successful with responsible AI? Obviously, at an individual kind of model level, you could do a bias test on this particular model, but that doesn't help much in terms of the senior management of the organization that are looking at what kind of KPIs, what kinds of values should we be monitoring to check that we're making progress and going in the right direction. Could you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a really excellent question, and really the question that initiated the project fair that we're working together with Marta and others at the Turing on. That was that realization that when we started experimenting with AI in financial services was one of the first one that started leading the adoptions, and regulators across the world quickly released high-level principles around how we should innovate responsibly. And everyone sort of agrees what these are when we read them. Of course, we want those algorithms and algorithmic system to be fair and transparent. We want to be validated. We want them to be robust and all of that. But there is a big question, how actually we go about this? And this question is still unresolved. We're still working towards that, and how we operationalize those principles, how we measure things. And this can only be answered in context. We really need to work closely, and talking to a comment from Charmaine about that need for collaboration between academia, regulators, industry to come together. These are common issues we're all facing. And we need to provide examples, and not only examples of specific technologies and algorithms, but the processes that lead to deployment and checks that we do in place, and how we arrive at the decision of measuring certain aspects in this way versus the other way. And I think what we've learned so far in this less than a year of the project, it's a 5 years long project, is that financial services industry are quite uniquely positioned in leading the way in responsible AI, in that many of the things and use cases already use data, already use algorithm, mentioning credit scoring, anti-money laundering. There is a long history of using quantitative methods and data to analyze that. And there are processes evaluating, mentioning model risk management, of evaluating, are this fair? Are we not breaching privacy by releasing outputs? Can we validate, can we trust those models? And that creates an opportunity, because there are new use cases coming with the AI, like ChatGPT-3, that there are new capabilities that there weren't there before. But there are use cases like we're discussing often in the context of financial services industry that they are not completely new things that we're trying to solve. They are the same questions that we've been solving for quite some time. We're just trying to enhance those. And that creates opportunity in terms of evaluating how we're bringing this new technology. Those models that we used in the past that we were happy, comfortable with using, and regulators have a history of checking and making sure that the banks comply with the principles that they put forward. We can now take this and look at how the new technology is, these new algorithms that we're deploying, how they differ across all the dimensions, are they increase accuracy, what sort of sacrifice on explainability and in what sense that potentially might be introducing. What about the robustness, if there will be certain shifts in the data, or if we will start deploying those algorithms in slightly different settings in which they were generated? What happens then? We can answer those questions, and we can benchmark that to something that we're comfortable and familiar. And I think we need more of that. We need examples across multiple use cases, really well documented. And so there is that need, of putting this all together in a holistic way. And that's where the big gap in research is as well. There are excellent research groups across the globe working in isolation at questions around explainability, at questions around fairness, at questions around verification. Marta is a leading researcher in the international arena. But there is significantly less research that is looking at the connections and holistically how these different things fit together. And if I improve one thing, what's a potentially impact on other dimensions of responsible AI. So we are at the beginning of the journey, but we're making good progress.
Great, thank you. You mentioned the point about benchmarking, which I think is interesting because we have to have a standard to compare against. Henrika, do you think that's something where the regulator might have a role to play in terms of helping to, because it feels like this has to be cross-industry, maybe across multiple industries, to set some of these standards and have points of comparison?
It's a good question and something we're thinking about. maybe this is not the right opportunity to speak about at length, but I think what I would say, reflecting on what Lucas was saying just now, is regulation, in financial services at least, is technology agnostic. So we do not have a view on the technology that's being used, which is a really important point, actually, because the risks, the technology risks that come, stay with the firm, and it's part of they need to be managed through the existing regulatory framework. And which is probably one of the reasons why I'm part of the FAIR team, if you like, because something seems to be shifting technology is shifting, it's changing financial markets. And I think there are questions there around, how do you measure the impact of technology more generally? And to what Lucas would say, I'm not quite sure that measurement necessarily needs to be at the level of the model. I think it probably, and the FCA is doing it at the moment with the new consumer duty, but we want firms to be able to demonstrate to us how they are measuring the impact of that principle and how it's being implemented in reality in the firms, and we're leaving it to firms to tell us how that's being measured and demonstrated. But as Lucas was saying, we're at the beginning of a journey. It's an absolutely fascinating journey, I think, because this is not just relevant to financial services, but I think across many areas of the economy that are technology heavy.
Great, thank you. If I can stay with you just for a minute. So we've focused so far in the talk primarily on risks and problems and so on, but obviously the reason we're wanting to develop AI is to do good things, to improve our businesses, to improve society. Where do you see some of the key positive impact areas that AI can help?
Is an excellent question, and I think Paul answered it really. So what happens with AI or any sophisticated type of data analysis really is you can gain some very intimate insights into individual consumers' behavior, their preferences, and of course can make inferences about their future behaviors. Now, you could say that's great. I mean, I, for example, could do with, pension advice, definitely. You see the use case there. But for consumers who have non-standard histories or specific needs or characteristics of vulnerabilities, they need a certain type of protection, if you like. And again, this is one of the challenges of AI. The question then is, how do firms use those insights? Okay. And that is the big ethical question that Paul was referring to. And it always depends on the use case, ultimately, over time, not just one use case, but over time and what that means for the market. So it's difficult to generalize. I think the one thing I would say, sort of drawing on the work we're doing at the FCA, the one area where I'm very optimistic about the potential beneficial use cases of AI is in fraud detection and anti-money laundering. I think these are areas where, again, we're only just starting to explore how these technologies can improve the detection of money laundering in financial markets, for example.
Charmaine.
I think fraud definitely, because that's an area where we want to protect our customers, protect their money, maintain their trust, is what I said. But another area that we're kind of doing good is very close to my heart, ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance part. So in that aspect, a key issue with ESG, or even climate change, banks have the financial industry has a fundamental part to play in terms of shifting us to a net zero economy. AI, in particular, helps us solve a lot of challenges. And believe it or not, it's kind of a little bit circular. The challenge that we have is with data. So we are actually using AI to help us solve this challenge with data. For example, how do we measure deforestation in Indonesia? So we are using things like remote sensing to be able to help us with that. Data quality is a big issue in terms of what data do we trust with climate. And what we're doing is we're using machine learning and AI to help us detect anomalies to be able to resolve the data quality issues in that. So we're doing a lot on this space with AI. So that is truly doing something for the good, so to speak.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to the audience after the next question, so do keep those questions coming in, please. We couldn't really have a panel discussion today at this conference without talking about ChatGPT and generative AI, could we? That wouldn't work in today's environment. So what I'd be interested to understand from the panel, and maybe Charmaine, you might kick us off, is to what extent does it introduce new areas of concern or risk from a responsible AI perspective beyond perhaps some of the ones that we've focused on, hitherto?
I feel like we've spoken a lot about the risks and how but now we're actually talking about things like ChatGPT, which actually for me, we are very excited about. It is huge opportunity and potential to help us with serving our customers better and making better risk decisions. And so within HSBC, we have hundreds of use cases that we could potentially use this, and everyone's really, really excited about this. But we've kind of narrowed it down to a few use cases that we should trial out with. But again, bearing in mind risks, we need to make sure that we have a safe environment for where we can actually experiment and breed innovation and opportunity. So we have kind of put aside 3 guideline questions as to how we manage this. So all use cases that we evaluate have to go through these kind of 3 high-level questions. So the first one is it safe? What is the type of data that you're using it? Is it going to expose the bank's customer data? Is it going to have data leakage? Is it safe? Are the prompts that we're using going to be safe in terms of not divulging any customer information? The second thing is it appropriate? Are we going to be appropriate in the way that we use it, in the outcomes that we get? Is there going to be human in the loop kind of situation where we actually validate these results? The last thing is, we are a bank, so what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? Is it worth investing that much time and effort on this? So that's the sort of guidelines, but obviously we do have to bear in mind the risks, and the 3 main risks that we're looking at is data risk, risk of leakage, accuracy. These models don't tend to be 100% accurate. So how are we using it in terms of the accuracy of this? And I think it's so new and it's so nascent that I think that we need to be a little bit more careful about how we do this.
Brilliant, thank you. There's some really good questions coming in from the audience, so that's excellent. Thank you for sharing them. Marta, could you give us your perspective on new risks or old risks?
Yeah, so for ChatGPT, of course, it's not just ChatGPT. I think we've heard about GPT-4 that's been released, but we've also heard about Bard and Bill Gates also, I think, said yesterday that this is the, greatest potential for innovation. And I completely agree. And I also completely agree with the risks, and that we should not over-focus on the risks. I will just mention one, and that is that we really don't understand how it works. And at the moment, it is being deployed without understanding how it works. In the way that ChatGPT is engineered, there is human feedback. So there is potential for bias in the human feedback. There is optimization, which is nonlinear optimization. Anyone in maths will understand this optimization stops at some random point. It doesn't stop at an optimum. So we really don't know what answers we are getting and to what extent these answers are statistical or not. The answers are based on associations. they are not based on reasoning. So, you know, there is no link between the object that I'm speaking about, that ChatGPT is speaking about, and some other things it mentions, just seeing similar things in similar contexts. But scientists like me are really excited about such challenges. So for me, this is really a great opportunity to do great research and hopefully push this innovation forward.
And there's also actually a legal risk, right? So in terms of intellectual property, who owns the inputs that you put to it, who owns the outputs as well? So that, I mean, that's fascinating.
I think just, I guess my tuppence worth, and everyone's got an opinion on ChatGPT, haven't they? So those that attended the Gary Marcus talk yesterday, I won't talk too much about ChatGPT, but I agree entirely, right? For artificial general intelligence, I'm a huge skeptic. I think it's a really dangerous technology that's been released for all of the reasons outlined by the panel and by Gary as well. And I think my personal view is, and this is not speaking on behalf of Lloyds Bank, my personal view is, can we put sufficient guardrails in something like a large language model for it to be useful for our customers to interact with? So those customers that for some reason may not want to pick up the phone and speak to a real person, or the existing chatbots which are awful, is there a way of getting some of our customers to interact with a large language model sufficiently so that they engage, and maybe engage in a way that they otherwise wouldn't do? So if that can be achieved, I think it's a good thing, but I remain a huge skeptic. Banks aren't known for picking up the newest technology and deploying it very quickly, generally.
So there's a question here from the audience which I think ties in quite nicely, which is, and I'd be interested in getting both the industry view and also the regulators' sort of view on this. Does the panel think that it will be tough trying to justify the risk of black box models to regulators? Logistic regression, etc., are more explainable but less effective. Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. Yeah, I think this is the nub of the problem, right? You know, there's certain black box models and certain models that we don't generally deploy in banks, but I think when it becomes a black box model and there is no reasonable explainability technique because it's completely non-interpretable, I think we really have to question whether or not we actually deploy that and how we deploy it. You know, I from a personal point of view, would be really concerned. It depends on the use case, so it depends if it's an edge case or if it's a high-risk model. But if it's high risk and it's highly unexplainable, that to me is such a red flag that if I was on the group risk committee, I would feel very, very uncomfortable with doing something like that. So I have a particular aversion to kind of pure black box models that are highly unexplainable.
Enrico?
Sorry, I was just looking at those questions over there, thinking about the SVB.
I'll come to that one in just a minute, actually. So if the rest of the panel can get ready to answer the top one on the list now. So the question was about black box models, essentially, and can we justify their use to a regulator in a regulated industry?
It's very similar to one of the other, what I was going to respond to some of the other questions is, so in this country, AI is not regulated per se as a technology, okay? What we do have is separate regulatory regimes. Whether that is data protection, which is for the ICO, it's conduct risk in financial markets, that's for the FCA, stability risk is for the financial stability risk is for the Bank of England. And what we are seeing at the moment, and that's what's my main reflection on those questions there, is from a regulatory perspective, the rules apply. Okay, full stop. In the sense that you do a regulated activity, you carry out a regulated activity, and that is very clearly defined. Most often you need a license for that. And you use AI, and it triggers certain, and you can use AI, okay, because the regulations are technology agnostic. But it triggers certain risks, and Paul and Jermaine have been talking about those already. You have a regulatory compliance issue. And it sounds quite a banal statement to make, but because this is a conference focused on AI and there's this unique lens on the technology, but I think we need to see it in the context of markets that are regulated and the rules that we have apply, and to my knowledge, actually, they work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is a question now. You can come challenge me and say, how do they need to adapt to reflect the new technologies? And I think these are the interesting questions. And again, we're at the beginning of a longer journey, and there needs to be some movement. But what we have at the moment works, I think.
Great, thank you. So the question that I suspect is capturing everyone's attention here at the top of the Slido is, do we know if AI has contributed to the current banking crisis, i.e. collapse of SVB, in any way? Henrika, do you want to comment first? Since you're obviously reading that with great interest. I may come to others on the panel too. So.
It's a good question. I don't think it's for me to. It's not for me to comment on that. I think.
Yeah.
I think we know too little, but it's mainly poor risk management based on what I've seen in press at the moment. But where AI could be helpful, and what people are thinking about, is do we have ability to quickly analyze the data to understand systemic risk that might be initiated through the collapse of not only Silicon Valley Bank, but also Credit Suisse in recent days. So these are interesting questions, where how quickly we are able to monitor the situation and in better control of the propagation and diffusion of the risk across the entire ecosystem.
Just to add to that, Lucas, that whole question of contagion, right, which we had in 2007 and 2008, and there was some high-frequency trading which was behind some of that. But now with AI models and machine learning trading, right, have we just upped the ante? Have we just hugely increased the risk of systemic risk within our financial system? And I think that's a question that really needs to be looked at, and that's part of our ethical impact assessment, certainly, is to look at the possibility of contagion through the deployment.
If I could add, I mean, this, of course, we are now putting black boxes within a complex system. And complex systems, even with very well understood components, can have emergent behaviors. We now have black boxes within complex systems, and that's what we need to study. And I suppose study, or perhaps an alternative, is to develop and shift to the use of methodologies that actually provide guarantees by construction that what is now a black box is trained from data, but it guarantees particular behaviors. At least this would help us limit the sort of space where dangerous behaviors can occur.
Just if I may for 1 second, I just want to highlight that point, that certification and understanding about the limitations of the technology, or knowing when we can expect given method or algorithmic system to work, and when we should just switch it off or have a right mitigation strategies. This is absolutely critical. There's a lot of conversations these days around auditing AI and testing and scrutinizing this and stress testing. If we don't have a clarity around those bounds and clearly stated list of risks and bounds under which we expect the algorithm to work, we wouldn't ever be able to assess and audit this. So the question of auditing and providing guarantees for the performance relies on the fact that those systems are designed in a particular way, so we are in control and we know what can actually be validated.
I think that's a really, really valid point. And it comes back to model risk management, right? To answer your question, Lucas, is actually really, really hard for a lot of fairly sophisticated models. And if the onus is placed on a second line of defense team that is really looking only at logistic regression and financial models and liquidity models, that's a really tough ask to get them to independently verify and validate them. And I think second lines of defense need support. They need support from ethicists, they need support from the wider community in projects like FAIR to help guide them in what they need to do. I think we shouldn't minimize that problem. It's a big one.
And I think it's the skill sets as well.
Yeah.
It's talented.
Absolutely.
It's a very niche skill set that is needed. So it's quite a tough. We need to train them, we need to upskill them, and we need to make sure that these skill sets are available for a second line of defense.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And certainly what I found in the team that I'm hiring is there are a lot of very talented machine learning engineers that want to do work on ethics, because they can see from the work that they do that actually there's a very dangerous side to what they do, and they actually want to learn how to do the ethics. So building technologies for Shapley values and causal fairness and all these things, we're finding a lot of people really want to do this. They see the social good in doing this, and I think that's wonderful.
They've watched Terminator, haven't they?
Yes, yeah, I think so. They've grown up with it.
I'm really sport for choice. I mean, the questions here are fantastic. I try and combine one or two and pick up on this thread of conversation here. There's a bit of a contradiction, if you like, between openness and what you can do in financial models, because obviously you can't sort of give away everything to the public. We're coming back to the conversation, Lukasz, Marta, about guarantees. Lukasz, your point about publishing, if you like, the thresholds, the standards, the things to be looking for in measuring a model. How do we balance that against the need for some proprietary ownership of models? If you tell too much, then people can game the system. So there's a trade-off there. Lukasz?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're all aware of Goddard's law that says that when the measure becomes a public good, it's stopped being a good measure. So this is a fine balance, and what I was saying, there is this need for holistic view that we need to understand the different trade-offs and tensions that arise when deploying and deploying AI in a responsible way. I don't think there is a good answer. You really need to look at those things through the lens of a specific context, how the technology is being used, what are the potential outcomes, what are the risks, and only then we are able to actually provide some answers. And that's what we do in the context of this project fair.
Marta, to add?
Yes, so I would say, but there is also another direction. I think the danger with AI is that it relies on data, and I think what we have learned is that a lot of data is private and has to be kept private. But data. What is data? A computer program is a data point. So if you take ChatGPT can be trained to actually write simple computer programs because seen them, on the web. So I would say that kind of openness is fine, but I think private data, should be kept private. And I think for that we need, within the project, what Łukasz is working on is sandboxes. So this is, how you can develop systems so that you can actually keep that data private. And I think my personal view is what we really need here is stronger methodologies that develop these things, AIs, including black boxes, in a way rather similar to the way that control engineering has evolved. We have theories, we have theorems that if I want to fly an aircraft, I take, and this theorem gives me the guarantees. And of course that has to be open and then, translated into technologies. I think that's the kind of shift that we will need in order to sort of maintain, I've seen one of the questions, to maintain trust about AI. I'm not pessimistic about AI. I'm just trying to raise awareness, I think, in the general public that there are risks and everybody needs to think about them, but also try to excite the younger generation into the potential, I think, for the science, the scientific foundations of all these developments. It's a really, great topic to work on.
Great, thank you. We're drawing to a close. I just want to ask a very quick fire question and get a couple of the panel to answer in sort of one sentence. The question is, what lessons can other industries learn from the financial services industry? FS is advanced in this space. Just in a couple of words, any of the panel like to give a lesson for other industries?
A process. Model risk management is a process, established, has a history. I think adopting and leveraging the best of that process would be a great lesson.
Fantastic process. Anyone on this side?
So for me, it's governance. So in financial services, it's the senior managers and certification regime. Yeah, established processes for accountability.
Fantastic.
I will stick on the process and governance, and also the fact that, as Charmaine said at the very beginning, is trust. The financial services is a business of trust, and whatever is being done in this industry is to ensure that that trust is not lost.
I think that's a great note to end on, trust, absolutely. So please join me in thanking our panel for a fascinating discussion. Thank you.